the Metacast Crypto Corner, brought to you by Naavik. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. First off, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. We are going to be setting the mood for you guys. I'm kidding. We're going to be doing something a little non-Valentine's here. We get to say words and describe game designs and analyze concepts that are so outlandish and out of the norm of Web 2 that you would actually never associate them with a professional business of gaming podcast like this one. But we have to do it. We have to do it for the science, for posterity, for the insights, because we are in fact talking about what could be the very first big, successful, natively Web3 game, and maybe even more broadly, a game ecosystem that has emerged since Axie Infinity. And I'm really not exaggerating here. You're going to see why once we get into some of the numbers. It is very different to Axie, but that is exactly what makes it so intriguing. It isn't play to earn or play to own or win to own. It's not following the prior meta or any of the prior metas that we've seen. And it's not trying to create economic opportunity in the developing world. It's not even trying to be mass market, in all honesty, at least not yet. But it is doing something really unique. It's leaning into community, cryptocurrency, and NFTs in a way that demonstrates a deep, deep understanding of what the current Web3 audience is looking for and what works. And I emphasize the word current Web3 audience because we are, of course, extremely early in the evolution of Web3 gaming, and who knows what the future holds. So we could be totally off, but I do know that our guest today shares a lot of these convictions as well. So buckle up, everyone. We are diving into the sewers, quite literally, to talk about Dookie Dash, the skill-based infinite runner, which was released on January 18th, very recently by Yuga Labs. And Yuga are, of course, the 800-pound crypto-native ape in the room. They're the owners of the biggest NFT collections in the world, including Bored Ape Yacht Club and its various mutant and canine derivatives, as well as owning a couple of other OG projects like Meebits and CryptoPunks. They've generated billions in secondary sales on OpenSea. They've raised ungodly sums of venture financing from Andreessen Horowitz, and they have by far the most mindshare and street cred in the crypto and NFT space. So we are talking about, the leader in the space. But the big question is, can Yuga Labs translate that into gaming success? And we know they're trying to do that. They've had a couple of really interesting key hires recently, which we'll talk about once we get into the episode. And they have stated they want to get into gaming and dominate gaming. So we are going to try and answer those questions and more. And to do that, we have Thomas Pan, who writes about NFTs, crypto, and Web3 in his Substack newsletter, aptly titled Web3 with T-Pan. And he recently wrote up an excellent deconstruct of Dookie Dash, which you should all go and read, and which we will be talking about today and going a lot deeper than even that piece did. We'll post a link in the show notes, as always, so you can go check it out. So, T-Pan, it is great to have you here again. Welcome back to the pod.
Niko, thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure. Excited to share my findings, my thoughts, potentially a couple predictions. And I agree with everything that you've mentioned in regards to Dookie Dash. Oh my gosh, been in the sewers too much. And there's just so much going on, I think, from a marketing growth perspective where I focus more on, but also gaming as a whole. We know that Web3 gaming is going to be a very large driver of adoption, growth, value to the space on top of entertainment, which is what gaming is at the end of the day. But the playbooks are still being written. I think Yuga is potentially writing one of them. And I think it's very interesting when we think about it from that paradigm in regards to how to incorporate tokenomics, how to think about engaging and empowering your community more than some sort of traditional established methodologies. And also how a brand, a company that started from basically a collection of digital collectibles that was Bored Ape Yacht Club, has now sort of ventured into the gaming space. We'll see how deep and how broad that will go, but I think there are signs that they are here to stay and become a serious player in a large scale, potentially, way.
All right. Well, that is, we're making some bold predictions here, everyone. So before we get ahead of our skis here, why don't we talk a little bit about what the game is? So let's actually start with some slightly salty language here for Valentine's Day. I'm actually uncomfortable using the official game announcement wording. You should go read it. It is quite something. It is very Web3 native. I will instead use kind of the Web 2 translation of it, which I'm going to use the words of Chris Messina, who's the inventor of the Twitter hashtag, and he's a top hunter on Product Hunt. And he submitted Dookie Dash for Product Hunt. And he describes it in these words. So I quote Chris Messina here. Dookie Dash is a skill game played like an endless runner. You have to save the key from Jimmy the Monkey's anus by going up through the toilet. Grab your sewer pass and jump in by February 8th, 2023. I have never heard a game announcement like this in my entire life. What on earth is going on here? What is Dookie Dash? Why am I in a Bored Ape sewer system? Who is Jimmy the Monkey? Why is there a key in his anus? How do I play the game? And what am I doing? How do I win?
Yeah. If for anyone that's been following Bored Ape Yacht Club as a brand and just what they've done from activations to how they really get their community excited and just their language, their creative and all that fun stuff, they like to be a little graphic. I wouldn't say, bordering PG-13 rated R and more tongue-in-cheek, right? So like you mentioned, Niko, there's a key coming out of a monkey's anus. And I think the quick backstory here is, first of all, looking at the Bored Ape Yacht Club roadmap. So for anyone that has an understanding or closer understanding of what's going on with the general roadmap, probably about a year ago now, but a while ago, Yuga Labs released an illustrated roadmap with some milestones and very vague descriptors of what their roadmap would entail. So some of those things was NFT NYC, their first ever large scale activation in late 2021. They actually had and this gets interesting, we could talk about this a little bit more later. They actually launched a mobile game, called Apes versus Mutants, January last year. And now we're at the stage called the Trial of Jimmy the Monkey. And in parentheses, MD versus MM1 prologue. And then there's a paw print of assuming probably a dog. So we're at that stage right now. And Bored Ape Yacht Club released a video showing Jimmy the Monkey and his friends. They're having a party. And for some reason, a traveler from the medieval times hands this box. And this was all sort of released with more details via sneak peeks. Effectively, there's a key that was provided to Jimmy. They were partying because that's what they do in the swamp. And then Jimmy accidentally somehow swallows the key while playing beer pong. And he tries to go to the restroom to get it out of his anus. And his friends go search for the key. So that sort of lays the scene for why you are doing the Dookie Dash. And it's funny how they spell it, right? Dookie in that term is Dookie. This is a play on words, Dookey. So again, this really just emphasizes on the humor. This isn't just a game. This really emphasizes the brand. And this is sort of a new way. I don't want to say brand new way, but this is definitely leaning more into just the type of groundwork that has already been laid in terms of the personality, the tone of what Bored Ape Yacht Club has done. So to the average individual, sewers, crap, keys coming out of anuses, that's absolutely disgusting. However, Bored Ape Yacht Club and Yuga Labs has owned that and is able to play on that in a way that many other brands and companies can't. Don't copy that per se, but think about how that even came to be and how they've continued to lean on that in tasteful and tongue-in-cheek ways.
Yeah, it's very on brand for them. That's the first thing that kind of comes to mind. And in my intro, I said they've really leaned into what Web3 and their audience wants, right? And I said they're not trying to go mass market with this, but it is still a very, very big moment in Web3 gaming history, I think. Again, I'm not exaggerating when I say that I believe this is the next big moment post Axie Infinity. Very different, but perhaps the next big experiment that's going to unfold. So let's talk a little bit about the actual game itself. It is important that this is a game. They have launched it as a game. It is skill-based. It's an infinite runner in the style of Subway Surfers or Temple Run, games like that. And when you have a skill-based game, it's important that it feels fair to the player. I believe, at least, it's important that it feels fair to the players. And while it is tongue-in-cheek, it's more of an entertainment experience, it's on brand, but people are playing this to win whatever's in that box, right? And so do the players of this game, based on your research, feel that the rules are fair for a skill-based game? Are people playing this and feeling like, okay, if I'm good at this game, I can beat other players that are good at this game too. By practicing, I can get better and better. Is that happening? Are you seeing that in the community?
Yes. So overall, in regards to is the game fair? Yes. There it's not going to be perfect. No game is perfect in regards to fairness. I think a very simple example is in many different games with various characters with different buffs or abilities and things like that. Occasionally, there is a character that a lot of players like, and it gets nerfed, right? They do game balancing and character balancing, and that has happened to a degree with Dookie Dash in regards to they do have occasional updates, game maintenance, sort of down periods for short amount of time because they sort of discover bugs and fix things up. So in regards to fairness, going back to sort of the mechanics of the game, in order to play, you need to have a sewer pass. And your sewer pass is basically your ticket or your token to actually access the game. And this is actually a very important note to be aware of for those that haven't been following closely. This isn't available to the public. This isn't something where you can, you pay, it's a one-time purchase to access the game. You need to have that pass. And that pass, if you wanted to get that today, let me just do a quick calculation. I think you did that yesterday, Niko, but I just want to be extra sure. It's over $4,000. It's about 2.7 ETH from some tools that I use. So how did you even get that in the first place? Holders of Bored Ape Yacht Club and Mutant Ape Yacht Club were able to access this, and there were 4 tiers of this. So if you had a Mutant Ape Yacht Club and only that, you got the tier 1 sewer pass. These sewer passes could be upgraded a level if you had a Bored Ape Kennel Club, which is the companion collection to the original BAYC collection. So if you had a mutant and a kennel club, then you were tier 2. If you had Bored Ape only, you're tier 3. And if you had a Bored Ape and a kennel, you were tier 4. So the differences between the tiers were their varying boosts to your ultimate score. So to a degree, instead of pay to play, it is, or to get the highest score, you ideally wanted the highest tiered pass to maximize your score along with a Bored Ape Kennel Club. And if you had that to begin with and minted that, great. You had a tier 4 sewer pass. Depending on your different holdings, if you had multiple, you mint multiple passes. If you had one, I had a mutant. For the record, I just sold it immediately. I was traveling. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I didn't have time. I didn't even play. And I completely regret all of that. And I wish I didn't bring my ledger while I was traveling, but that's a whole different story. And don't do that. It's probably not a best practice. But those tiers help you boost your score as appropriate.
Quick question in between here. So I definitely wanted to touch on these tiers because this is kind of where I was going with this fairness question.
Yes, definitely.
Typically, like this would be in Web 2, this would absolutely be pay to win, right? People would be like, man, I got to go and spend like $120,000, which I think is the floor price for a Bored Ape at the moment, plus whatever a kennel dog is to get the tier 4. Like that's the ultimate definition of pay to win, right? Like literally you got to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to get there. So why is there no uproar? Like, is this just the difference in Web 3 versus Web 2 mentality? Is this what what Yuga has figured out is that their community, like, it's a status symbol for them to have these things. They don't care that like they don't have the tier 4. They're just happy that they have the tier 1 and they're part of the club, so to speak. How does this really factor into the gameplay? Because I have to believe that a tier 1 sewer pass just has no hope of winning. Like literally has no hope of winning. You have to have a tier 4 pass. So how does that jive with the notion of like people don't feel cheated, so to speak, by only having a tier 1? And we're going to get into some of the stats here because I think you've done some calculations. Like there's like a 94% play rate on the sewer passes, which means even the tier 1 sewer passes are playing the game, even though they know they have no hope of winning ultimately. So how do you square that? Like how do you have fairness on the one hand, and then the ultimate in pay to win, and for there not to be an uproar?
Yeah. I think there's a few factors at hand, and also in regards to the activation or the play percentage of those series passes. In order to continue along the storyline, this is only a prologue potentially even, but this is just part one of multiple parts of this journey for this activation, this campaign, even this game, which might ultimately in hindsight be a mini game. And that's one thing I do point out. We don't know. There's probably a metagame, but this might just be a mini game. So in regards to is this fair, I think there's a few other factors at hand. And we'll talk more about this particular piece, but there is a token sync. So for anyone following, Yuga Labs has ApeCoin powering the Yuga ecosystem. This is, owned by the community to a very large degree. There's a treasury, there's a DAO that votes on various initiatives. And to additionally boost your score and also the in-game boosts that help increase your score, you can purchase 2 ApeCoin, which at this time of discussion, probably about $10 to $12 to boost that session and that dash. So that is something that's available to all different passes. So even though that's not the end all be all to get you to first place to win the magical golden key, that helps. Additionally, there are players with tier 1 sewer passes that do reach very high scores. I don't know for a fact how high, definitely not top 10, because the boosts at that point matter a lot more because those boosts are on a percentage basis. So if you get 500,000 versus 700,000, that percentage just on an absolute basis increases a lot more. But that does help as well in regards to the fact that this is a skill-based game and this is a skill-based mint based on your score. Lastly, I think what you're already alluding to a degree, Niko, is that if you held this in the first place, if you minted this in the first place, this is a version of an airdrop. So you don't necessarily lose. I think that you would think about it in the inverse in terms of how much you win. You can just sell your pass like I did without even playing. You could hold on to your pass. You don't need to play, and you could just sell it at a later point because you're patient and you saw the price rise from a low of 1.2 ETH to a sort of steady high of about 2.5 to 3 ETH. That's great too. You still win, right? For the holders, to be clear. So for the new entrants that want to join in, then it's up to their decision and their budget to be thoughtful about, do you want a tier 1? Do you want a tier 2, 3, or 4 pass? So I think that's part of the reason why there has been no uproar. And on top of that, Yuga understands that communication, I think a lot of brands, Web 2, Web 3, doesn't matter what industry you're in, communication is key. And they made very clear that there were different tiers for this mint weeks in advance, maybe even months, right? There were 4 tiers. What you hold determines what tier you are. And the more valuable collections or combination with Bored Ape and Kennel that you hold, you will get the better thing. And then they revealed what the better thing actually entailed. So communication, the reality for holders that this is an airdrop of sorts. And for anyone that got that, you can't exactly lose. And also that it's skill-based. So even if you are in a disadvantaged position, you can still rank higher, much higher. Maybe not top 10, top 100, but much higher.
Mm-hmm. So, it's one thing to have minted a sewer pass by virtue of holding one of these tier 1, 2, 3, or 4 combinations of Bored Ape ecosystem NFTs. But it's another to actually go and buy a $4,000 to $10,000. $10,000 is the tier 4 current floor price on OpenSea. Why would a non-Bored Ape ecosystem holder spend $4,000 to $10,000 on the sewer pass? What's in it for them? Obviously, they can try and compete, and if you buy a sewer, tier 4 for $10K, it's still a lot cheaper than owning a $120,000 Bored Ape in order to get that tier 4 pass. But what's in it for them? Like, why would somebody who's a non-ecosystem member buy in for $4,000 to $10,000 in a sewer pass just to compete in the game, when presumably the ecosystem or whatever new games they're going to have or new adventures in the Jimmy the Monkey saga come next would still require you to have a Bored Ape or a Mutant or a Kennel Club? What's in it for a non-Bored Ape ecosystem holder? Why would somebody buy in? And they have. I don't know if you know the exact numbers, but I think sewer passes have done about $4 million in secondary sales when I checked yesterday, give or take. So it's not huge. It's not billions like it is for Bored Apes, but it's still millions of dollars are being transacted. Why buy a sewer pass if I'm not in the ecosystem and it doesn't get me into the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a very great question. And I do want to preface the answer with just the reality that, the average person should not purchase this type of asset, especially or even just access to the game if they don't financially have the means or stability to do so. And also on the flip side, for game developers that are operating in the Web3 space to expect people to act in such a way, whether it's because of low supply, whether even because it's an established brand. This is a Yuga thing. It's very important to understand what's going on and even maybe emulate elements, but don't expect exactly the same results. So in regards to motivations here, the reality is to a degree that the various collections in the Yuga ecosystem are not necessarily the most affordable. A mutant ape, haven't checked recently, but probably approximately 14-ish, 15-ish ETH last I checked, maybe a week or two ago. A Bored Ape Yacht Club, I think from a US dollar standpoint, over $100,000. CryptoPunks, Meebits, separate ecosystem, even though they're owned by Yuga. It's not cheap to enter. You have other side, which is much more affordable, between probably the 1.5 to 2 ETH range. That's their metaverse, and that's land. That's not necessarily what may be, and we'll see, a playable character, another profile picture collection or digital collectible, something that complements your Bored Ape or anything else if you are a holder in the ecosystem. So in terms of an entry point, this is a relatively affordable entry point. There's no guarantees, again, in regards to what this can be, but there is a lot of benefit knowing that this is part one of a multi-part saga, story, maybe even game. There actually were sneak peeks of what might be to come in regards to the results of holding, playing, and also gathering different parts for this game. On January 19th, BAYC actually tweeted out, and again, playing along with their storyline and all those different things. There's a dog prophet they call Gary. So basically, it's a dog. They sort of just coronated him or sort of assigned him as a prophet, licked a toad without, for lack of a better word, the dog got trippy because it licked a toad and started sketching things. And in the sketches, which was basically a sneak peek, there were these mechas that were revealed, with dogs operating in the center, potentially. So this really was a premonition of what is to come. And there was more further speculation in regards to what this might be, whether it's playable assets, another digital collectible collection that might be a PFP, or something for other side, TBD in that regard. But I think that combined with being able to join the Yuga ecosystem in a more prominent way. And also, if you think about it from the addressable market and the reality that Yuga is at a position that's more or less leading the pack, I think it's hard to really argue otherwise at this point. People want in. So what are those various entry points? Additionally, it's important to realize that there may be holders, Bored Ape holders, mutant holders, other ecosystem holders that want to actually add more sewer passes, knowing that this leads to more. So maybe they only have one Bored Ape, they don't have enough capital, or they don't want to use their capital to purchase a second, but they want a lot of sewer passes because they believe that there's upside and for whatever reason, financial or otherwise, for this. So they might just load up on a lot of sewer passes. So a lot of basic economics, but also thinking about audiences, thinking about track record, thinking about what is to come too, though no one knows exactly what.
So obviously a lot of speculation, and Yuga are the masters of stringing people along, for lack of a better phrase, over a long period of time, and teasing, lots of teasing as to what could be. And who knows if they even know what they're going to do with with this story or these games or these assets or whatever. But you've mentioned that the 26,000 sewer passes have been minted. Again, the prices of those range from $4,000 to $10,000 from tier 1 to tier 4. Do you happen to know how many Dookie Dash runs have been made by non-Bored Ape holders versus existing holders? I would imagine most of it has come through, hey, I owned a Bored Ape, I owned a mutant, I had a dog, like I have these passes. I'm sure, why not? Why not run? I got my sewer pass free. But 4 million has been transacted on OpenSea in the secondary market. So some folks are buying these sewer passes and are not holders, presumably. What percentage do you happen to know? What percentage is holder runs versus non-holder runs who are playing the game?
I do not, unfortunately. I think that's very interesting. And the reality is, to a degree, this is something that can be queried on the blockchain from a data
Right.
perspective, which
That's
is
why I
super
asked, because
interesting.
everything is public out there.
Yeah.
So somebody could do this
Yeah.
math and look at like, okay, like what percentage is just catering to the existing ecosystem, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, right? Keeping your community
Yep.
engaged, right? And again, Yuga are really good at doing this. So if this is a play to retain and engage your already existing audience, and 100% Dookie Dash runs is by your existing holders who minted the sewer pass and like, why not? I got it for free. I might as well do this run, see if I'm any good at this. Um, it's a really interesting question to ask: is how much of this has opened up the Yuga ecosystem to folks who are more price sensitive, who can afford $120,000 Bored Ape or can afford, a $15,000, $20,000 mutant, but can afford for. I mean, it's an odd person who spends $10,000 in a tier 4 pass, but then doesn't go for the mutant ape, right? But I'm sure those people are out there. So I think that's a super interesting question, and I hope one of our listeners who's good at querying blockchain stuff actually does this math, because I would love to know how much this has opened up the Yuga Labs ecosystem or the Bored Ape ecosystem to newcomers who are not buying into the apes, but are buying into the sewer passes as a cheaper entry point, and are competing for to win, presumably.
I agree. I think from a data perspective, in terms of what's publicly available, and I think we'll get into at a later point what's not as publicly available from a game standpoint. This is fascinating, right? Whether you're in the Web3 gaming space, Web2 gaming space, even outside of gaming, to understand what a collection like this, where there's a requirement for engagement. I do want to emphasize, you need to play. It could be a score of 1, it could be a score of 100, it could be a score of 10 million, right? It doesn't matter. You need to actually participate at least once in a validated, verified, not cheating way in order to continue along with what the next phase is summoning, right? So that's what gets very interesting about this. And on top of that, this is a closed environment, right? You need to have that sewer pass. This is sort of antithetical to a lot of best practices, right? You want as many people to play your game as possible, so you maximize the footprint. Yuga doesn't care about that. And because of that, from a data standpoint, from a secondary market standpoint, from a who's minting, who has what, are some people accumulating even more as a result? It gets very, very interesting. So yes, I agree in terms of seeing who's new coming into the ecosystem. And I would even add on to that, right? Because I think there are sort of point in time data analysis that could be done, like what we're describing here, super important, very relevant, especially at this point in time. But when you think about it on a longer term, sort of time horizon on a longitudinal standpoint, if I were Yuga or if I were on the data team, oh my gosh, so much fun. I would look at those particular users, day 0, as an example, day 0, day 30, day 365, however you want to slice and dice it. Do they eventually enter the Yuga ecosystem at a later point? Why? Can that be tied to an actual qualitative event? Can that be tied to a physical event versus an announcement versus, some sort of association with another Bored Ape Yacht Club holder, as an example, right? And if you could determine what those points are and why, and if you have statistically significant data to determine like, hey, this event actually causes ecosystem to change or grow or do this in a very particular way, that's an insight, whether it's just for the company themselves, whether it's for the industry to actually take a learning from that playbook, that gets very, very interesting, because this all sort of leads to onboarding and sort of engagement in different ways that I just don't think people have really done quite yet successfully.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then this is, again, why both T-Pan and myself are not exaggerating when we really do believe that this is a kind of another watershed moment in Web3 gaming. I do think this is one of those moments where we could be totally wrong, of course. Who knows where this space is going to go? It moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But we both have strong conviction that this is a really interesting moment in time, and is probably going to spawn a brand new meta. Let's be honest, just like Axie Infinity did. Once people start hearing about some of these numbers and seeing how engaged, we're going to get to that in a second. We're going to talk numbers in just a moment here. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about a key part of the gameplay. This is really key, is that every player, or every sewer pass holder can play as many times as they want. And there is a set time frame, which is pretty short. It's only a matter of weeks. Like if you go on vacation, you miss out, right? And so they chose January 18th was when they minted. I think they minted the sewer passes, and then February 8th is the final deadline for playing, and then on February 15th, which is tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Valentine's Day when we're going to air this episode, February 15th is going to be the day when they reveal who has the highest score. The sewer passes will be validated, and whoever has the highest score is, at least this is what they say, is going to win the key in Jimmy the Monkey's butt. And it's a key to and I quote here, this is from Yuga, mysterious and very important box. Okay, so let's not lose sight of what all of this talk is all about. This is about winning the key in a monkey's butt to open a box, and whatever's in the box is going to go to the winner. At least that's what we believe as of the announcements. What is in that box? What does the community think is in the box? I know one of the things you call out in your newsletter is there's just a lot of speculation, right? And there's, again, Yuga's really good at doing this, kind of teasing you like, oh, there's a mysterious box. What's in the box? What is in the box? Do we know? And what does the community think is the most likely scenario?
Overall, in short, no. We don't know. No one really knows. Want to make that very clear. Speculation is great because we live on Twitter and that gets a lot of engagement, right? Educated speculation especially. And I don't think it's blind per se, but I mentioned it earlier. There's likely some version of a new collection being created here. Things are pointing towards some sort of mecha, Gundam, robot, type of machine. There's something called power sources. That's 100% confirmed. That will be summoned at the later stage, which will be February 15th. I imagine between the time of this recording and maybe airing, there may be more sneak peeks and maybe even some details. We're not TBD. Can't predict the future on this one. And there also has been some points that other community members have noted where, as an example, someone pulled a quote saying that Gordon and Garga, the core founders of Yuga Labs and Bored Ape Yacht Club, mentioned that they do not want to create any more PFP collections or core collections to the Yuga ecosystem. If that's true, then this will be another collection, but one that's either complementary or additive to, for example, maybe other sides, their metaverse that they're building. Not sure, right? So those are sort of the general directions that can go. Additionally, what has also been confirmed is that there is and this is something that I like to point out because I just feel like not many people remember this as much, except maybe, core community members. There is another game being developed, and this is public information. You could find it if you just dig around. But Enway Games, a game developer, now is a fully owned subsidiary by Animoca, has teased over a year ago, just illustrations of a mech type of figure being built. And that was with Bored Ape Yacht Club because that was tagged, right? So that seems to be potentially something, right? So maybe there's another game that somehow gets integrated at a later point to other side. But whoever gets first place, and of course, because this is a skill-based mint, second place still gets something very good, maybe not the best, but it sort of goes down sequentially. I imagine there will be some sort of tiering mechanism, some sort of percentile mechanism that will either determine sort of percentage chance of receiving something with rarity and or maybe an absolute basis through the distinguishing the tiers. But first place probably gets some version of a one-on-one, something that just no one else has related to the key and what's in the box. And then that sort of moves down. So that's the general thought process and what people are sort of gravitating towards in regards to speculation, but also predictions and some sort of some level of educated assumptions.
So people are obviously very excited about whatever's in the box. And again, calling out that you can run or dash as many times as you like. And I think one of the crazy stats that you pulled in your newsletter, you're going to give us some updated numbers here that you can't get anywhere else. But there have been a ridiculous number of Dookie Dash runs for how few, again, only 26,000 sewer passes, how few people there are. There have been, or in your newsletter, you said there had been 4 million runs. I think you're going to update that number for us in a second. The number at that point, that was 150 runs per sewer pass, or over 10 runs per day per sewer pass. That's just an incredible amount of intense gameplay, right? Like that's just a crazy number for any game. Never mind one where you got to connect your wallet and do all these kind of jump through a bunch of hoops. Have ApeCoin, if you want the boosts. So first of all, please update us with the latest numbers, which I know are even bigger. And then secondly, what are some of the takeaways here? Tell us also about like the percentage, completion per sewer pass, and what's really interesting to me is what happens, after this game is done, because it has a limited shelf life, right? So does the game just die off and you go on to the next game or the next adventure or the next chapter or quest or challenge or whatever Yuga's doing? Is this? And I can't emphasize enough, like how weird it is for like in a Web 2 context for a game developer to launch a game that would only have like a 3-week shelf life, right? You build all this, content is expensive. Game development is hard. It takes time to develop a game that you expect people only to play for 3 weeks, right? And then for it to presumably die off is so against all best practices, right? And so for players to play a game 10 plus times per day, every day, knowing that the game is gone. Again, I get that there's a prize at the end of it, so it makes sense in some world. But in another world, it's just complete nonsense. Like it goes against every single best practice. So first off, update us on the stats, because they're eye-popping. They're kind of crazy. And then secondly, what do you make of this weird phenomenon of having a game that you spend a bunch of time developing and then just expect it to go away?
Yeah. These are very great questions. And in regards to high-level stats, that was one thing when I first wrote my piece, I think a couple of weeks ago. I was just like looking at the leaderboard, which is publicly available, and they publicly share some fun stats for strategically thoughtful and smart reasons, right? One, for the community themselves, leaderboards are a very powerful motivator. Everyone loves to brag. Everyone loves to compare. People like to look at numbers and see who's up top. That's just a fact. What I found also interesting that does not happen as much and not in such a live setting is the amount or the number of dashes or the number of plays. On top of how many players or how many sewer passes, let's say specifically, were actually playing. Right. So let's start with the sort of utilization rate, or the play rate is what I'll sort of call this. Play utilization rate. Great. I make up a new term. Maybe it'll be an industry term. You heard it here first. Right. At least as of this morning, 25,904 passes were minted out of approximately a total of 29,000. So I'm assuming, who knows, maybe they're just inactive accounts and sort of wallets out there. Sort of
they're on vacation. This is the thing.
Yeah,
this is what I was telling you before. And it's like you're going to be really upset. You're on vacation. You have 3 weeks to play, and it's like, damn it, I could have won. Anyway,
they lost their wallet, just like Bitcoin, right? There's billionaires out there, millionaires out there. It's just it's lost. But out of approximately 26,000, just a shade under 26,000 passes that have been minted so far, just over 24,000 have actually played the game at least once. That ratio will adjust over time, but more or less it's going to be in the low to mid 90%, maybe a little higher, assuming we have just about a day left. So 93% play utilization rate, right? Like in gaming, I mean, Niko, you're more informed than I am, but I don't know of any metric that would be like even 90% plus, like whether it's any type of conversion rate. I mean, if there was a pair conversion rate of like that, like boom, like you're just instant Hall of Fame.
It's nuts because presumably there are duplicate sewer passes in there as well, right? Like if I was an original minter of Bored Apes and I happen to have 100 of them in my wallet, and I would presumably be minted, at least 100, tier 3 sewer passes, right? And so yes, I'm going to sell some of those, sure, right? And then this is where the question about new entrants comes in. But every one of those sewer passes has then been played with, which is kind of crazy. Like, is it a case of, and I know there aren't that many people, like it's mostly unique holders now. Most of the people who minted 100 are now very happy and very rich and sold off many of their Bored Apes. But nevertheless, there are going to be people who hold multiple sewer passes, and that presumably means that they're playing with all of those different sewer passes in order for presumably for a multiple chance to win multiple times, so to speak, or more bites at the apple, or whatever analogy you want to use. So that is an incredibly, remarkably high player utilization rate, to use your term. Let's see if it sticks.
Yeah.
What explains that?
Yes. Yeah. So with some of the elements and some of the sort of parameters of this game and this general mechanic and what Yuga is doing with this activation, there is incentive to, right? There is absolutely incentive to, and whether Yuga wants it or not, there's financial incentive. Right. So it's important to realize, just like Axie, as we mentioned earlier, there was a lot of incentive to stay engaged. There's a lot of incentive to play for hours on end, whether you're, a scholar, whether you're in a guild, no matter where you were in that ecosystem. So it's important to realize that there is that incentive. Additionally, regardless of the financial incentive, it's important to realize that there's an additional incentive to continue along with the story, regardless of $1,000, $1 million, $100. If you don't participate in the game, you don't get to participate in the summoning. You don't get to participate in what they've already hinted at in regards to multiple stages in what they call like Evo 2, Evo 3, and there's multiple paths to Evo 3. Who knows exactly what that entails, but you don't get any of that. Right. So even money aside, my gut would tell me that play utilization rate would be extremely high, maybe 80% instead of 93, or maybe it will be 95 by tomorrow. But you don't get to participate in the story, regardless of making money or not. And everyone loves Yuga and Bored Ape Yacht Club's story. They've been working on it for almost 2 years now, right? Especially if you minted back in April 2021. Right. So I think that's important to realize. You don't always have to use money or like a specific financial incentive or like, market making something because there's going to be secondary volume. That helps. Don't get me wrong. That's going to move the needle materially. But if you could create a story and use different types of hooks and carrots and potentially sticks to encourage your community to join along with your journey, and you need to do X, Y, and Z, and they're already bought in. Again, if they start from zero, well, like shit, who knows? But that's one thing that's probably underestimated. People automatically think about like, hey, I can make $10,000, I can make $1,000, I could, flip this to eventually get a Bored Ape. Sure. Don't get me wrong, that's important. But there's a story to be had here, and it's very clear that there's so much more to come in regards to this arc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic FOMO piece again, isn't it? I mean, and again, that's what Yuga's so good at is creating FOMO. So are you suggesting, I mean, this is all speculation, we don't know exactly what's going on, why, but you're suggesting, if I can paraphrase and just summarize, the high player utilization rate, even for sewer passes that are presumably owned, multiple sewer passes that are owned by the same person, the reason they're playing with all of the sewer passes or most of the sewer passes at this time is because each sewer pass needs to be played with at least once in order for it to qualify for whatever. Okay, so
for the summoning,
exactly. So I wanted to clarify.
So the story, such a financial,
such a clever. I mean, it's simple and in retrospect, kind of obvious. But again, you don't really see that in Web 2. This is a very Web 3 native thing where you mint a bunch of tokens and you need to use each token in order to actually qualify for. It's almost like a lottery in some ways, right? Like, we've alluded to this, and this was a point that you made very strongly in your newsletter. Actually, sorry, you didn't update us on all the numbers. Let's get to the...
Yes. So more quickly, in regards to the total number of dashes, as of earlier this morning, we are at 7.14 million. So this is approaching double. And I think in the last day, we're probably going to crack 8 at this rate, right? Everyone's trying to get higher scores in really quick, some quick plays, hiring other people. We'll talk about that too, to play for them. With, again, 24,082 passes actually playing. So this is a smaller subset, 93% of the larger play utilization rate. So that averages right now just shy of 300 plays per pass. So again, if Temple
That's
Run,
doubled.
if I could see Temple Run's numbers, again, this is across all players, right? This isn't saying this is the top 25 percentile or whatever. Like, I don't even know what that would be then. That would be even higher. That's 296 plays. And this includes, again, like your example of a holder of 100 Bored Apes. Well, they're just going to play like 90 of them once, right? So if you want to think about median versus average, I would love to see those numbers. Those are obviously in-house. But this starts to get very interesting when you think about motivations, when you think about which types of holders. Break this down by tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Break this down by weekday versus weekend. Break this down by where they're located. Break this down if this is a new entrant versus an existing holder of the Bored Ape Yacht Club ecosystem. I think the data gathered here is going to be very fascinating, along with motivations. And the last piece, didn't answer this yet. What's next for the game? I think you make a very good point, Niko. I think there have been other folks who have mentioned a game like this takes on the low to mid million, 7 figures to make. Makes sense. High quality game. Yeah, you could argue to a degree this is a reskin, but still, this requires game development. There's a lot. This is blockchain enabled. Don't forget that, right? There's incremental costs that Web2 games are like, hey, let me just reskin Temple Run. Fine. That they had to consider that. Other folks don't. On top of the fact that security is very, very important here, because there's a lot of motivation to, cut corners or, incorporate different modifications to the game, because this is on the client side, at least there are things that you can do. And on the server side and on their side, they're going to do other things to sort of mitigate a lot of that. So what's next? There are interesting plays here. I mean, they could keep this as a game for all holders, but more interestingly, and this goes back to sort of thinking about how this is sort of a walled garden for their holders and community right now for access, maybe afterwards they open it up to the whole ecosystem. Right? And maybe there's actually a secondary prize. So you could tack on layers to this, right? And that could turn, they could just do a sort of monthly leaderboard, annual leaderboard, and they could actually enter the ecosystem in a different way. So I think that could be interesting. I don't know if they're going to do that. That might get too complex. But if they even just open it to the public, what happens in the wake of the summoning and other parts? Because this wasn't available to everyone yet. And they could see, hey, connect your wallet. What do these people hold? Are these also still Bored Ape Yacht Club holders, so sewer pass holders playing just because they like the game and they want to check in every now and then? Maybe that will become a part of the story arc where they can incorporate Easter eggs at a later point, where actually the community or even the public or the general Web3 ecosystem, now that it's public, go back to. Because now they have a game that they know that works and has mechanics, and they can modify it, they can reskin it, etc. So this can be an asset, this can be an investment that actually proves ROI over a longer period than just now.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, they've done a very, very good job. I mean, again, we're speculating wildly here. We have no idea what they're going to do. But the fact that there are so many different positive paths forward, that all makes sense, right? Both for holders and for a broader audience of gamers out there. Just shows how good of a job they have done putting this out there, putting the lore out there, building the FOMO, building the hype, building the tease, getting this incredible level of engagement, people playing hundreds of times, thousands of times, tens of thousands of times in order to get the high score, and sharing it all on Twitter, of course. And that's my next topic for you. In your newsletter, one of the phrases you used that stood out for me is content multiplier. This is Yuga Labs' or Bored Ape ecosystem content multiplier. What did you mean by content multiplier? We can guess, but how has this game, this piece of content, created it's almost its own ecosystem of new content, not just on Twitter, but we're starting to see Twitch streamers. We're going to talk about professional gamers who are playing this because they want to. We're also going to talk about people renting out their sewer passes, or not renting out, but like loaning them out to professional gamers who are just really good at playing games. Like, this has spawned this incredible ecosystem of content that has brought attention to non-ecosystem. Even if they haven't bought in, it's brought a lot of attention to the non-ecosystem folks, both gamers and just casual observers. And my goodness me, we're doing a metacast podcast on the topic. We're spending a good hour talking about what Yuga Labs is doing and Dookie Dash and a key in a monkey's butt. Like, it's incredible what they've accomplished in terms of getting people talking about this. And this is what, again, part of the reason why I think this is a watershed moment or potential watershed moment in Web3 gaming, is because it's not just about the game. It's also about the content and how that's kind of evolved around this one silly, like you don't get this with Subway Surfers. You don't get this with Temple Run. Like you get some of that, but you don't get this incredible explosion and this Eye of Sauron for 3 weeks, like observing this crazy phenomenon that's happening right now. So talk to me about content multiplier. What did you mean by that? And how has it actually multiplied content out there?
Totally agree with many of the points that you mentioned. And I think with how I even decided to write this piece about Dookie Dash's one-to-many content multiplier, Dookie Dash was covered by everyone and anyone. And I'm not a fan of just covering the same old thing, but a specific angle of a popular headline. And if there is a unique headline there, then I talk about the really popular topic. And what stuck out to me was not the game, was not, what they did preceding the launch. That was all great and worthy of being written about. But what really caught my eye was when this launched, and I was even traveling, so I definitely wasn't as engaged across, different, channels and social, et cetera, as I was. But it was very clear to me, everyone was talking about Dookie Dash, and for understandable reasons. But what was more interesting that I noticed, and this doesn't happen often, was all the different ways people were talking about Dookie Dash. And when you think about it from a growth and marketing standpoint, that's a dream, right? First of all, if you don't have to spend anything on marketing, that's amazing. And if it's organic, right? And if it goes viral just through organic, which is what happened with Dookie Dash, that's even better, right? That's as good as it gets. And that's what happened with Dookie Dash. So I really broke down from my observations the type of organic content, hence why I called it Dookie Dash's one-to-many content multiplier. One game, granted, it was a significant investment on Yuga's part, but this one game spawned all this different type of content and all these different categories of it. So I broke it down, the first being score and rank. We know everyone loves to talk about the rank and score. That still happens today, almost 3 weeks later. If people are getting first place, if people are reaching a personal record, people are reaching a high score, people like to brag about it. There's a lot of that. There will always be a lot of that until this competition ends. Tips and tricks, again, how to get a higher score, different ways to sort of avoid certain obstacles, Twitter threads about all that, especially early on when people are better understanding the game mechanics and how to get a higher score. That's more established now, but that was a very prominent category of content, or especially in the first week. Gameplay. People just like to record gameplay, and especially if it was for a high score or just different things that they were doing. So that added, not if it was on Twitter as a channel, that obviously added the video element, not just text or a Twitter thread. General commentary. There are a lot of different comments about Bored Ape Yacht Club, just how much they love the game in general, not really specifically talking about the mechanics of the game like the other categories, but just, hey, I really like the game. Great job, Yuga. Or I never played games before. Now I do. This is awesome. I love Dookie Dash, just as an example. And then there's the other category. By itself, can't really put into any of those above. But for example, there was a prominent Azuki developer that wanted to just try hacking the game. White hat in a white hat manner. And he gave his flowers to Yuga Labs in regards to they did a pretty good job. And he eventually found something, a workaround, but, talked to the developers and the team about it, and they patched it up, right? And then there's many other things that are derivative there. So when you go back to the way I described it, one-to-many content multiplier, it's very uncommon, to say the least, and especially from an organic standpoint, that one piece of content, whether it's an announcement, a game, one thing that leads to all this other stuff. In gaming in particular, there is potential for this, right? Web3 games, Web2 games, anything in that space, because it's a much richer piece of content, allows for this. I think what made it very interesting is this is competitive, this is skill-based. So then the first two categories I mentioned, tips and tricks, and particularly the score and rank, coupled with the fact that this is a 3-week time-boxed period, added to the groundswell of content on that front. And when you think about it from the one to the many, and this is one thing I distinguish in the sort of framework I create, the one is created by the team, and then the many pieces of content are proliferated by the community, right? So thinking about that dynamic is very interesting and important. So what the team, the studio, what the effort can feed to the community to then be the marketing department and proliferate gets quite interesting if you arm them with the right seed for that content to be created. And I didn't necessarily draw this out per se, but this is only even on Twitter, right? If you want to add multiple dimensions to this, you think about the channels. So that's Twitter, but then what about all the conversations going on in Discord of all those categories? What about from a written standpoint or a verbal standpoint, all the Twitter spaces, all the podcasts, all the newsletters, with all these different categories and all these different angles of content, then Twitch streams talking about similar things too. So this really becomes not just a multiplier, but sort of an exponential multiplier. So how can this be emulated, at least in bits and spurts, is something worth exploring and looking into more.
And it's not just about, the sheer volume of content being created, which of course is helpful because you can't help if you're living even adjacent to this ecosystem of Web3, you're going to know, you know about Dookie Dash, you know about Yuga Labs, you know what's going on right now, but it's also about who is doing the creation of the content and who is doing the playing of the game. And I think one of the interesting things that you called out, I think not so much in the newsletter, but when we were talking earlier, was there are now professional gamers who are playing, and there are holders who are loaning out their tokens to professional gamers to play the game and try and beat the score. That is really, really interesting. And of course, there have been professional gamers in esports, for quite a long time now. That part isn't new. But what's quite new in my mind, or at least very interesting in my mind, is the notion that I can be a owner, a holder of a digital asset, and I can safely give it to somebody for a temporary period of time, have them compete with something that I own, and then safely have it returned to me after this 3-week contest is over. Talk to me about that dynamic. That is incredibly interesting to me. While perhaps not super unique, it is, it's an emergent behavior that I think deserves some more conversation. It's something that really unlocks, I think, something unique about Web3 in a way that Web2 can't do.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very interesting in regards to the new dynamics and mechanics that are showing up, depending on what the sort of activation is or what's going on. There are situations and there are solutions that are coming about to allow for a concept called warm delegation. So let's say you hold a very valuable asset. In this case, let's say a sewer pass. You want to keep your sewer pass in a very secure place because you don't want to get hacked. You don't want to even lend the actual NFT or token out to someone. And, even if you trust them at one point, maybe they turn out to, be a bad friend and run away, right? That has definitely happened before in the space. So it's always important to hold your assets in a secure manner. So, you're sort of stuck. You're like, okay, well, what do I do with this thing? I suck at Dookie Dash. Maybe you don't even want a professional to play the game on your behalf and increase your score as much as possible. Maybe you just want your friends to play, right? Just to experience Dookie Dash, right? Let's not even think about sort of the financial motivations or like the score motivations. Just like, I want to share the love. I happen to have a sewer pass and just want to have other people enjoy it. So in the concept of warm delegation, you could basically grant, and I'm oversimplifying this, but you could grant access that a particular token that you hold has to other wallets. And that's called, different terms for it, but in this case, I'm calling it warm delegate, right? You're delegating that access to someone else in a warm manner, right? Meaning it's from cold to hot wallet, hence warm. So as a result, people who have these sewer passes can let their friends play. They can pay professionals to play to increase their score as much as possible. And also this is allowed, right? This is not against the rules. This is also something that's just very interesting and fascinating to see what people do to increase their scores either by themselves or through other manners. And again, this is something to watch closely because there might be situations where there is another similar Dookie Dash type of situation, not from Yuga, but a different company or game studio. And they're like, you can't do that, right? How do they manage the cheating, potential cheating and cutting the corners, things like that. But the warm delegation part gets fascinating in regards to its use cases, even outside of Dookie Dash. But it really opens up the concentric circles of marketing, content, reaching someone's end goal, also just enabling different things to happen. So I think that's something also to take a close look at. For example, in the future in a game, maybe you don't want to sell an asset, a very rare item in the game, but you want to just loan it out, right? This isn't quite loaning out in that situation because there maybe are other direct ways to do that. But this is a version of that to take note of that will have other use cases in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really interesting. Again, there are so many facets to Dookie Dash and what Yuga Labs is doing here, not just on the gameplay side, but the marketing side and the teases and the community element, really leaning into NFTs and what they mean and kind of almost embracing cheating in a way that in Web2 gaming you would never do, and recognizing like, well, we can't control this, so why don't we just lean into it, right? And certainly they can't plan all of these aspects out, and control everything that happens. That's really antithetical, really, to Web3 and the decentralized nature of what we're kind of observing here. But leaning into it as much as possible and saying, well, this is what it means to own an NFT, and so by all means, loan it out or delegate it out or have a professional streamer play. Really, really interesting. And again, I don't know how replicable this is, because obviously I think one of the key things we got to call out here is Bored Apes are incredibly valuable to a large and desirable to a large number of people. So I don't know if any old Tom, Dick, and Harry, game developer could have done this, right? And could have created this level of excitement. There needed to be that notion of, this is a valuable asset, this is a valuable ecosystem, this is a cool club to be a part of, for this to actually happen, right? I think that's important to call out. You can't just manufacture these different elements and replicate what Yuga's done. There needed to be the community first, and then from there you can start to kind of ride that wave a little bit. Okay, I have two quick questions. One thing we haven't talked about a lot is ApeCoin. So ApeCoin is the Yuga Labs Bored Ape ecosystem token. It got airdropped at some point last year. I forget exactly when it was, but second half of last year or middle of last year. A lot of excitement around that for holders. I bought a mutant and a kennel club at that point just to get the ApeCoin drop. I think a lot of people did that. And so, and by the way, I've since sold them, so I haven't actually not played Dookie Dash, in case anybody was wondering. But ApeCoin is a part of the game. I was surprised by how little it is utilized, how small a part of the game is. You can buy these little boosts, but it's relatively cheap, air quotes, compared to how expensive the NFTs are. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what role does ApeCoin play in the game? Why did Yuga Labs incorporate it the way they did? Why didn't they do more, is I guess my question. Is it a sink? It doesn't seem like it's a very big sink if it is. Did it drive price movement at all for ApeCoin? And what could Yuga Labs have been thinking by incorporating ApeCoin the way they did, as lightly as they did? That's really what I'm asking. You could have done a lot more with ApeCoin in the game, especially given ApeCoin is going to be the coin, the token, the fungible token of the Bored Ape ecosystem. Why not do more with it?
Definitely. So of course, definitely, we're not behind those closed doors, but this is the way I would think about it, right? And I want to bring it back to a small point I made earlier during this, episode, which was, this is not Yuga's first game. I want to emphasize that, and that will really make this point more clear. They launched a game called Apes versus Mutants at the end of January 2022, and it was a little bit more of a dungeon crawler, like an infinite dungeon, not infinite, but a dungeon crawler. I forget any comps off the top of my head. You could look it up, but this was available to the public, right? However, if you're a holder, you could log in, connect your wallet and log in your score. And there were different sort of levels and all that fun stuff you could upgrade. There were no sinks, right? A year later, they come out with Dookie Dash, right? Infinite runner, sort of hyper casual-esque, obviously skinned in their sort of brand and everything, with a small token sink, right? But closed this time. So basically, they had a very strong understanding of engagement, player rates, all that stuff. Oh, and I forgot to mention, in that first game that was launched last year, Apes versus Mutants, they had prizes, and the prizes were not, they were physical prizes, right? They were not like, another mint or anything like that. They were like exclusive T-shirts. I think the number one, the first place for the mutant side, because it was two sides, apes versus mutants, and different sets of prizes for each, was like a car, like a mutant ape themed car, which is actually pretty cool as a prize. So there's a lot of similarities and differences in regards to what I imagine informed them with their decision. So the big difference with Dookie Dash is they were actually incorporating their first token sync, right? And also when they launched January last year for Apes vs. Mutants, there wasn't a token out yet. Right, so that's important to note. So they're taking what I believe is much of their learnings in a hyper casual game, understanding engagement specifically from the holder standpoint. Maybe from the non-holder standpoint, they realized that wasn't worth investing in, and they'd rather keep it a closed environment for now, because those are the individuals most incentivized to play. And then they incorporated a token sync. So what this will do, and clearly, is basically they were not, from a meta standpoint, right? They were alpha testing, beta testing, and they're going to have a much larger and richer ecosystem from a gaming standpoint, is my assumption and prediction, that incorporates that. Public versus holders, right? Syncs of varying degrees. How do you think about prizes in a physical sense, in a digital sense, in something that may directly be related to Yuga's ecosystem versus something that's completely not, and more for clout and just repping? So I think they're having a very thoughtful approach. And why they didn't do more, this is a token, right? There is money involved with this, and there are price movements involved with this. And to a degree, we have to remember a lot of this still has some degree of regulatory looming overhead. So I think having something that's $10 to $12 versus, hey, you can maybe do infinite ApeCoin boosts in one single play, that gets a little dicey for different reasons, right? When some of the smoke has yet to clear just from a broader standpoint. So I think this gives them the best vantage point that allows them to incorporate these types of syncs in a very thoughtful way, and that's pretty defensible, but at the same time allows for more room as they gather more data. And I think that's a very, very important theme here from a public blockchain standpoint, from an internal first-party standpoint, to a gameplay standpoint, to a tokenomic standpoint. And they have, I'm sure, looked at case studies of the Axie Infinities of the world, even the Step-ins of the world, any sort of, some degree incentivized mechanics where there's tokenization, syncs, earning, etc. This is not play to earn in regards to a tokenomic standpoint. This is a skill-based mint, right? And they earn in a very different way, but they can pay in a specific way with ApeCoin. So that's the way I would think about it, and imagine they are, at least to a degree, with a much more well thought out thesis too.
Yeah, interesting how. Yeah, to me it was really interesting how small a role it played. But yeah, I totally take your point, which is they're playing the long game. They can afford to play the long game. They're very well capitalized, and actually that brings me to the next question, really comment and question is, a couple of their recent hires have been very telling. They are bringing over Daniel Alegre, who's the COO of Activision Blizzard. He's joining them at the end of Q1 this year as their new CEO. I think they've hired a ex-Scopely chief gaming officer. I think one or two other really pretty senior hires from the gaming world. Maybe an obvious question, but what does it signal to you to see all of these extremely experienced gaming hires? And I'm going to preface that or follow on that question with is there also risk involved, right? If they're clearly signaling their gaming ambitions. I'll answer your question. They're signaling their totally gaming ambitions. Yes. Obvious question. They're signaling their gaming ambitions, but does it also include significant risk? They are very Web3 native. They are very crypto native as an internal team. And I know they don't build their own games per se, but they write the lore, they create the FOMO, they're just experts at engaging the community. Is there risk by hiring these very Web 2 first senior executives. And I'll use my own experience from Zynga. We did well back in the day hiring from EA, all of the EA top brass. That worked out pretty well. But this is almost like apples and oranges. Web 3 and Web 2, we haven't seen great success with Web 2 native game developers building in Web 3 yet, and vice versa. We haven't seen great Web 3 native, crypto native folks doing well with games yet. This is the exception. This is why we're saying this is a watershed moment. The risk, in my mind, is that they open themselves up to the same myopic approach from Web 2, where it's like, well, this is how it worked in Web 2, so we're going to do the same thing in Web 3. That's clearly not the case, right? What Yuga Labs has done with Dookie Dash and Bored Apes and over the last 2 years building that doesn't happen in Web 2. It's not the same thing. So they're signaling their gaming ambitions, but what does it mean to be hiring senior executives from like Activision Blizzard and Scopely and places like that?
Yeah. First of all, those hires are massive. And I think even though those are typically talked within those circles, I think as time passes and everyone in the industry, especially Web3, has the memory of a goldfish, when you think about the release of Dookie Dash, you get caught up in okay, who has a high score? When's the next mint? Do I have a sewer pass or not? Do I want to get a sewer pass or not? It's taking multiple steps back. And for myself as sort of an industry analyst of sorts, like looking at these things and thinking about, okay, well, what direction are they headed in and who have they hired to allow for that? So Daniel Allegre, Spencer Tucker, Chief Gaming Officer at Yuga, who was hired in September, by the way. And Daniel Allegre's news is much more recent. It's clear, you already answered the question. Yes, lots of gaming ambitions. I think in regards to risks, absolutely. Again, I mentioned it earlier. I'll mention it again. The playbooks are still being written, and this is a playbook, right? Of sorts. It's absolutely one that should not be replicated and like copied to a T. Maybe elements or certain pages of it, yes. But even this specific playbook has not finished being written. Maybe this is just a chapter. Maybe this is the whole book. Who knows, right? And in regards to risks, what has been mitigated to a degree is one, and I imagine to a degree with the hiring of Spencer Tucker and also Daniel, these efforts were to at least, I imagine, a large degree already built and decided. The main decisions were made in a way prior to them actually joining, at least to a degree, right? Particularly Daniel Allegre. So it seems like from a core Yuga team point of view, there's already a lot of thoughtfulness when they're thinking about gaming. And they do need the chops and maybe industry connections and sort of different level of institutional knowledge and even executive institutional knowledge to take them to that next level. But it is promising that this has been pushed out and received with a fair amount of fanfare and positive response without necessarily, a large executive coming in to make those decisions just yet. Additionally, I think this goes back to, yes, cliche terms and buzzwords, but they started with a community and brand, right? So they have these flywheels and growth loops that will sort of happen to a degree independently of the gaming side. So what the hope here is, and I imagine, is as they sort of build out different divisions, so to say, as an example, and mind you, they acquired a content juggernaut called Yuga Labs and acquired those collections too. So they have the sort of brand side, the marketing side through the fact that, owners can have a commercial license for their respective brands. Then you have the content initiatives that have been created. And then you have what seems to be a gaming division or sort of at least department being created. These all can complement each other, but also independently grow. So this isn't necessarily, hey, we're just a gaming company. Eventually, they might brand themselves and such, and I would find that very interesting if so. But they started from a very different point of view, and then now they're becoming something else. Just like how a lot of even some of the largest gaming brands and sort of titles in the world have started approaching the world of entertainment, right?
Last
The
of
show
Us.
Arcane.
Yeah.
Last of Us.
Last of
right?
Us. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if anybody's watching, but it's a great show in my opinion. So,
I heard great things.
One thing I'm just going to push. So I agree with you, or at least I don't disagree with you that you can have separate divisions of essentially a brand. It's a brand, right? Like Bored Apes now, and all of the subparts, of Yuga Labs, or the different collections, are all brands in their own rights, and you can use them in different ways. You can use them for on T-shirts. You can sell a bunch of Bored Ape looking T-shirts. Right? That's the merch side of things, right? You can make games like they're doing now with Dookie Dash, and I think what you said is true up to the level of like chief gaming officer hire. But when you're hiring an Activision Blizzard CEO, who theoretically should have the final word on what the kind of executive plan is going forward, I think that does introduce an added layer of, oh, we're now a gaming company. That's the only pushback I would give you. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I don't know if the original Yuga founders are going to be still exerting a lot of sway over how the CEO operates, which, by the way, is not a great place for a CEO to be, to have the original founders exert a lot of sway. If you're CEO, you're CEO. So that's the only pushback I would give you. And I think that's why I was asking about the risk piece. It's fine to hire a chief gaming officer and have that be a division and like they're in charge of the gaming piece. But when you hire a CEO from a gaming company, especially a Web 2 gaming company that's Activision Blizzard, has all the baggage that it comes with, I think that does introduce an extra layer of risk. Either for Daniel in his decision making, if he's being overruled by the founders or kind of the original vision for the brand, or for the original brand, if Daniel gets to exert CEO power in the direction they go. So I think they're a little bit in conflict with each other, in my opinion. Let's see how it plays out. But that's the only pushback I would give on the points, which are well taken. That you said.
You make very good points on that front, and it can't be. It should not be taken lightly, and I think that does come with the other side metaverse play. There's something there from a gaming standpoint. Metaverses are gaming ecosystems. Like, you could call it whatever you want, but like from a broader standpoint, it is an ecosystem that has a lot of gamification involved at the minimum, whether you call it a game or not. And I think that is something that Daniel Allegri, at least from an experience standpoint, probably can attest to a degree. He didn't manage a metaverse or anything like that, but I think you make a very good point. And you can't, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. So they are moving, I agree, in that direction. Carries a lot of risk. With Dookie Dash, seems like it's a great start, to say the least, at least.
Agreed. All right. Well, we've had a long episode. We knew this would be a long episode, but there's more we could talk about. This is a really, really fascinating case study. It hasn't even been written yet. We're recording this on February 7th. Tomorrow is February 8th, which is when the contest officially ends. And then there's a week until the 15th when they reveal. So this has not yet been written. There is more to talk about. And I'm hoping we can do some kind of follow-up, whether it's pointing to T-Pan's newsletter, or maybe even another episode if there's enough to talk about what happens next with Dookie Dash, V2 and how the story unfolds. And I just want to say a big thank you, T-Pan. Incredible insights as always. Very data, focused on your approach, which I love. And so really looking forward to seeing what comes next and reading. Certainly, I'm sure you're going to be covering this. And I'm really curious to see what the key in Jimmy the Monkey's anus unlocks. And on that note, I had to get that in there. On that note, T-Pan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to all of our listeners. We will be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. Never weirder than today, I think, on this episode. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send questions, guest recommendations, and comments to me. My email is nico@naavik.co, and you can find me on Twitter @NicoTheFin. DMs are always open. Until next time, thank you.